All right, well, hopefully people keep joining, but we kind of changed the time. We said we were going to change the time, but we changed it a little bit last minute. So might end up not getting as many people. Let's see. Yeah, welcome. It's just a few of us here. I see you, Caleb, Jay. I don't know Cameron. Any anything you want to say? Hello or anything like that?
Thanks for moving the time zone. And it looks like it's regular now, every 4 weeks.
Yeah, so I just got this one and the one 4 weeks from now updated.
Okay.
And then I think after that, it's going to be the time change. And we have a vote for a different time after that because we go back and you go forward.
We've actually gone forward already.
Oh, really?
This is the weird window where Australia and the US are.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Out of sync.
Yeah, anybody new here? Hey, Randall, thanks for joining.
Hey, guys.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, Amir is he's actually in Europe time zone right now. So he's like 1 a.m. or something. So yeah, so I assume for the charter, whoops, we're not going to have enough people here for quorum again. So hopefully we get enough people to join this meeting one of these times.
For reference, what is quorum? What is the...
I don't have an exact number, but I think we kind of went by feel, like if enough people were here, then, for what we typically see, then we would say approved.
Well,
probably enough.
Yeah, I have bad news for you. I'm here.
Hey,
so adding to your quorum. Hi there.
Yeah, so let's just jump into it. Last week, Randall's covering some of the work on the ingestion process and kind of had some topics to discuss about criticality score.
Yes, I met with Caleb and we had a phenomenal meeting together. Talked about a lot of great stuff, and I think that we're going to be able to fit what we want out of in the criticality score tool. So I don't know, Caleb, if you wanted to talk a little bit about what you got away out of that meeting as well, but that's basically where I got with it.
Yeah, so Randall was talking about moving the spreadsheet that we currently use into Markdown format and making it like visible in a GitHub repository, which I actually think is a really good idea, and puts process around how it gets changed and updated. And the idea is, how does the criticality score tool fit into that? Which is a great question. The long term, it'd be great if the criticality, like this is in a perfect world, the criticality score tool would always produce perfect results that match what everyone wants from a list, but that's not likely to be the case for a long time. So having a manual list is a great idea. And Randall was talking about how do we make sure that something coming into that list is actually somewhat critical without having the burden of a reviewer having to go off and check a big list or figure out what's going on. And so the idea is using criticality score tool as like a one-shot, hey, there's a new change here, does it, what does it score? What are the signals? And I think that is a really good use case and one that we could work at supporting through the criticality score tool. Randall went ahead and created a Docker. Did you actually create the action, Randall, or did you were in the process of doing that?
No, it's for the Python tool. It's in my GitHub repo. I just archived the repo.
Okay. Yeah. So the idea would be to create a way to run, to create either a single Go binary or a Docker container that you can use to run it against a URL and it spits out a bunch of scores for it. So that would then work with having a markdown version of things, and then you can then update as you update it, as someone proposes updates through a pull request, you could then annotate the pull request with information that is collected from the criticality score tool. So is that a correct reflection of our meeting and what came out of it, Randall?
I'm happy with that. Yeah.
So it's still interested in collecting like on scale signals and being able to do that sort of analysis, particularly to improve the score as well and make its rankings better. But I think this is certainly a use case that makes sense and it's kind of immediate and a valuable way to actually use the tool in a way that, can provide some immediate value. So I created a bug around Dockerizing something, and in the process of productionizing it, which is what I'm currently working on, I'll also refactor things in a way that makes it possible to have a one-shot, like per repo sort of way to run the tool. But yeah, I'm open to input from the working group as well, if anyone has thoughts and opinions.
I have some thoughts not well thought through. If this would be a good time, I've always been a little concerned about the strong weighting of the number of participants. I don't have a great solution. But how's this? Let me describe the problem, which I think Caleb, already well aware of. That doesn't mean there's a better solution, which is why I've never screamed too loudly. But it's obviously quite possible to have a project which everyone depends on, but is completely unmaintained or very poorly maintained. There's only one maintainer, doesn't get involved very much. I totally understand why you weight contributor count, because under the argument that, and please tell me if I'm mistaken, that, hey, if there's a lot of contributors, an unusually large number of contributors, that suggests importance. I get that. That does make some logical sense. My worry is, of course, not having participants doesn't mean it's any less important. It just means it's higher at risk, which, oh my.
For the record, we did talk about this.
Yes. I don't have a great solution to this either.
Well, Amir wanted us to follow the ideology that this is a set. So like what we talked about was staying away from like hard numbers. And that was something that Caleb and I talked about, because maybe when we get the output for this list, we're going to stay away from like a hard criticality score. But Amir basically wanted us to add stuff to the list. This was in the list of requirements that he kind of has, where basically things are added as a set. So in other words, we will not like judge based on the actual score or based on any one factor. It's more like a group of factors, and it's not a ranking either. So the list could theoretically grow. And then Caleb kind of brought up a good point though, which is, but how do we go about maintaining that list? Because, things need to get updated. So that was where we got stuck in that conversation, kind of taking Amir's requirements of not being too subjective, being more quantitative, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's kind of what you were saying, but
yeah, I mean, I totally get the goals of quantitative. I just don't. I've always wondered if that really is running counter to the goal instead of helping us.
Agreed. Another suggestion that I had was that we just basically leave it running, and every so often we will do maintenance based on maybe the last commit that was done in the repository. But then that's also not a good one, because there are very specific projects, and I think the ones that we talked about, like Caleb and I, was Xorg, which is very interesting, and GPG, which has one main developer that holds it all together.
Right.
And I think we even talked about this in the P-cert, because we also talked about how like he doesn't want really like a whole bunch of outside influence, GPG and all that stuff too. So how would that look though in the output? Because that might give the wrong idea.
But currently, one of the main weights is, and I included the link. The top weights are dependency counts and commit frequency and contributor count, followed by things like org count and commit frequency. And
So
go ahead.
Yeah. So I can talk. So we can talk about the particular ways the score is generated.
Sure.
And I think I certainly agree that contributor count is like a confounding thing at the moment. I don't know if it helps very much. In particular, it kind of elevates in C-based repositories in GitHub things that are Linux forks, as opposed to things that where they might have one contributor trying to work on some feature. But like in terms of stepping outside, like we can talk about the weights or the things that we should have there or not have there. And this is where the work around productionizing what we have, I think is really important, where we can have this discussion and start playing around at scale with how changing things will affect the score. Rather than like at the moment, it's really hard to run this thing more than once again across a million repositories. If it's very easy, then or it's automatic, then adding a change and seeing how that is reflected in the scores becomes a lot more routine. And then these discussions become a lot easier, where you're like, I don't think contributor count's right. Okay, let's put in something else or get rid of that and try something new. And I like at the moment, it's very much weighted towards participation and popularity and activity. And I think that that's not. I read some paper somewhere that was like, popularity doesn't actually mean that it's going to be more secure. But also, I don't think the popular projects are the ones that are necessarily the most critical either. And so adding better signals, and this is one thing that I'm really like after the productionization, very much interested in, is adding more data around dependencies or dependent counts, because that information is much stronger in terms of its criticality than any sort of activity or popularity on the project. So stronger data around dependence is something that like we need to find those sources for. And I think long term, like that'll have a better impact in terms of finding things that are critical. So this is my plug for like productionizing is a good thing.
Let me say this though. In my marching orders that I was given from Amir, I know that part of what Amir was going for was staying away from weighed scores. So in other words, his ideology is that we would just pull in like the raw data, like amount of contributors, amount of contributions, last commit, like when the last release was made, things like that is how Amir defined quantitative data, just for the record.
And I think that it's worth also distinguishing, for the record, the difference between the output of the criticality score tool and a hand-curated list of critical projects or a hand-curated set of critical projects that this working group is interested in. And they don't have to be the same. And I'd like the automated system to end up reflecting the hand-curated list as much as possible. But I think it's worth remembering that they can be separate things for the time being, or forever. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add, David, that I think a low criticality score doesn't disqualify anything, right? So we're kind of looking for all these signals and looking for the one that is the reason that it's critical. Yeah.
Right. Fair enough. And agreed. As long as there's manual review to say, hey, wait, but that I tried to do this. We use different weights, but we quickly came to a similar conclusion that you run tools, you run analysis, you find stuff, but no measure set of metrics really fully captures the real situation.
And I want the handcrafted set of lists, a set of critical projects to inform the algorithm that is and the particular score that's being generated. And that's kind of where I find value from this sort of hand picking, not caring so much about the score, and allowing things with low scores in the list makes it helpful to understand whether the list itself, the output of the criticality score project is doing its job or if it's way off the mark. And that's really important.
Agreed.
So what are the next steps here for getting the integration going?
I was going, well, I think Caleb was going to work on getting output for a single, like, because the way I was going to work it is that I was just going to run a diff in a GitHub action and basically pull the information that was added in a PR and then run that through criticality score. That was kind of what I was going to do. And then take that output and basically post it as like a comment or something in that PR. That was kind of my ideology of how I could run this.
And I'm very happy to support that as well by doing the necessary work on the criticality score project. So for the record as well, I'm interested in deprecating the Python project. And this also serves that end as well, where having the ability to run criticality score simply across a single repo is really handy for people who are coming past the project and interested in what it does.
So Randall, is the ingestion automation, are you blocked on getting this feature from criticality score? Or?
I am.
Okay.
Basically, I have a script that I made for JS as proof of concept with Anthony, and I gave that to Caleb, so he kind of saw that. But yeah, basically, as soon as I can run the diff on the one from the one line on the Go tool, then I can get back on that, and then I can make the proof of concept of the actual repo. If you want, I could do that in my own personal, or I could just do it in the OpenSSF one, or I can transfer it. Whatever works.
I
Yeah,
will
sorry.
I will up the priority of my work to make sure that we get in on top of that. We may want a new repo for the action as well.
Agreed.
If we want to put it under the OSSF banner.
Yeah, I think we can add that, and we can also put it on our working group project. It's kind of like a sub project under our list as a call out to this effort as well.
Cool.
Yeah,
I did notice.
I was going to start, Randall, I will try and have something for you to execute within the next couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you need anything in Go also to program, let me know. I can fit it in.
Cheers. Thanks.
So one of the things I noticed was we have in our meeting notes doc, we have the key documents and the process for identifying critical projects that Amir wrote. And so he wrote it with the Google form and Google Sheet in mind. Should we update this doc, or do you think we're not at that point yet? I can present if you want.
I think he was looking for feedback on that for the record. And I think that's where that was at.
Is the doc prescriptive or descriptive as well? Is the
Here, let's take a look. Can you see my screen? Yeah, so I think it's the main thing here is kind of the ingestion engine.
Help me here. I've lost I've lost the plot here. What are we trying to do here by looking at this doc?
So
I'm
we have up
sorry.
here, kind of in our process laid out
Right,
here.
right.
We don't, it's, as I was looking at the, we don't have anything here.
So maybe we need to clean this up and turn it into a doc and release.
Yeah, maybe. So
I
here
mean,
is just,
we need to update and make a new list. If the previous step is agree on how we're going to make that list, no one would be terribly surprised. So
So
um,
if I can provide a timeline of how I think things happen, I think Amir had the list, and I think he was going to try to like make a version 2 with that Google form that he was trying to create, and then
mhm.
we kind of found out of everything that was possible with GitHub, and then that kind of became the focus. And kind of, to be completely fair, as soon as we kind of hit that topic in this working group, it kind of becomes the hot topic of the phone call. So there's kind of been a lot of things being thrown and a lot of really great ideas. But yeah, so that kind of depended on me getting that proof of concept together and a couple other things as well. So that's kind of why there's almost a parallel effort, but not really.
Yeah.
Because yeah, like the original, like the Google form is based on what Amir thought was possible prior to GitHub. And I think he likes the GitHub idea better. He just
I
didn't
think
know
everybody
that.
does. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've agreed that the GitHub way is better. So yeah. And as I said, like the calls get really exciting when we hit that topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody is on board that like thinking like, yeah, instead of Google Forms and Google Sheets, we should be using PRs with Markdown, you know, or with a YAML that gets processed into a Markdown that we view. So I don't know if we want to update this to kind of show our current consent, like working group consensus. This is kind of moving away from this.
Is it worth adding comments and asking Amir to?
Yeah. Yeah, we could.
But moving this entire doc into GitHub as well would be a good idea.
Yeah, we should probably put it. I don't know if it's because we kind of have a V2 for our list here in our initiatives. Maybe we take this, convert it to Markdown, and update it with kind of our new ideas. I don't know. What do y'all think for working on Google Docs if it's something that's still kind of under development?
What I'm doing for the glossary, because this might be something we can do, kind of sort of, is I was going to just like concatenate everything into a huge YAML file, because the best practices working group wants something of like an easy way of searching the glossary. So Glenn and I kind of been finagling a way of how to like concatenate a bunch of markdown files together into something of like a YAML database, and then just running that on like with a simple search on like an Astro site.
Okay, well, yeah, I guess we'll just start with
start small.
pinging Amir, or we'll comment on this doc and then we can discuss next time.
Fair.
Okay, well, we need to find a way to make next step, I think.
Caleb, can I ask you a question real quick?
Go ahead.
Do you think that before the end of the next meeting, like I'd have something to package? Because if that's the case, then you can let me know when you're ready, and that way the next action item can be to like have a one-shot demo of the tool.
Oh, I'd like that to be the case. So in terms of sorry, I want to understand the time frame. Do you
So I
mean
think we
by
have 2 weeks till our next meeting.
okay? I can be finished within 2 weeks. I would be to be finished earlier than that, so that you have time to do something I would be unsure about.
Okay, no, that's if you could be finished, I think that would be at least the next goalpost, Jeff.
Yeah. All right. I will do that.
Okay.
Because
so-
then we can have the meeting, and then the 2 weeks after that, I can not the next meeting, but the following meeting, I can have the proof of concept ready with the GitHub action.
Okay. Sounds good. Unfortunately, I do have to run early. Could somebody else kind of shepherd the meeting for the rest of the way?
Sure,
Okay.
we can figure it out. We have David; he's an expert.
I am here. It is true. I have done I have actually created critical software lists before. My omniscience sadly is limited. but if the goal is I stay when you have to go, Jeff, I am able to stay.
What does this button do?
Well, you know what? That's probably one of the better exits I've seen. All right. So I guess, yeah, and unfortunately,
I want to point this out, David, just real quick, that I think that this
Sure.
also plays into our previous meeting at 1:00, the architecture, because
Mhm.
there have been certain groups that have been unclear how this list works, which I've
Yeah.
needed to explain.
Right. I've also needed to explain, well, at least I was explaining the older list, which is not actually, I mean, that one's done and it's good to document it, but we really need to document further.
Because I actually think, and I actually also read in detail and I told this to Caleb, the OpenSSF inaugural post. And
Mhm.
in that post, if you read it, they make this list out to be like somewhat important, because they do state on there that part of the OpenSSF is to identify critical infrastructure projects.
It
And
is
that's
somewhat
why-
important. I mean,
Yeah.
don't come here. I mean, presumably none of us show up to do unimportant things. So yeah, I think
True.
that's it. It really is important. No one here is wasting their time. At least I hope that you don't feel that way.
No,
It's a hard problem.
yeah, it
Yep.
is. What I was getting more at is that, and I told this to Caleb, that should we align, because sometimes I feel that, like, I like where Amir is headed, but I don't feel like that vision aligns with the overarching vision. Because when I say that it is important, like, if it is important, then I don't think that anybody should be able to just add any project because they think it's important. And if it looks important enough, then basically what we're suggesting is that it'll get merged into the list.
Yeah, I don't think that was actually Amir's intent.
We actually had a long conversation about this, to be honest with you, because this was the conversation where we changed the term list to set, because we don't want to make it a competition, if that makes sense.
Right. Never. Yes, and I was part of that. I think I was the one who suggested it. But that said, it's a set because we're not trying to order within the set. However, there is still a distinguishing characteristic, if you don't mind me using the math terminology, of is it in the set or not? Because if anybody can propose anything and just it gets in the set, then that's not very meaningful. So there has to be, I think it's basically an effort to try to make it so we don't have to make useless decisions. It doesn't, we don't need to decide if it's number 60 or 70. that's a lot of effort that doesn't matter. But deciding whether or not it's in the set or not, that's what matters. And with the hope that makes the decision making somewhat easier because we're focusing on just the in or out question.
Fair.
But that
That's
said,
something
we
that-
still have to have a process to make that determination.
Yeah, no, this is something that I also discussed with Caleb about our alignment with like how we're defining things, I guess. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean I think the rationale for the propose and no one objects, I think was more, maybe the problem here is it's not well worded. Okay, because I think what you just said is different than what I recall was agreed to, and I see where you're coming from. I think the assumption going in, and this is, I think, not well captured, was that in many cases, people are going to propose things that as soon as you hear it, you go, oh my gosh, of course that needs to be in there. Okay. Do we really need to do in-depth analysis for the Linux kernel? I doubt it. Okay. Maybe for a network time protocol, Damon, or or something, some other widely used implementation. My guess is, hey, that's deployed in several tens of billions of devices. Probably that's important.
Right.
Node's probably important. So is C Python.
But then you get into, for example, the frameworks of JavaScript to get real political and real fun.
Right. Although, what
Because there are some important ones like React, but then you have all.
Okay. The reality is, and I'm going to step on, I think, a lot of toes, but if you're primarily going on popularity, you've got jQuery and React. We can argue whether or not jQuery is a framework, but they say they are. I'm going to accept it for now. jQuery and React sheerly by numbers need to be in. So I don't think we need to argue those. Now, if you want to make the argument, hey, Vue should be in there, I think that's justifiable. I think if somebody objects, that's fine. But I think that was basically, the first one was primarily for the, let's not argue about things where there is general consensus.
Fair.
Just so,
Fair.
and now that I'm looking at the text, what I just said is how I interpreted things, but I see how the text could be interpreted differently.
Okay.
So so it was very much just to, hey, let's not argue about the things where, no one's arguing against the point. Everybody agrees.
But you also see how there's a few there that could get real like.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where step 2 is, a formal voting system. Once you get beyond, basically don't argue about the things where nobody disagrees, then argue about the things where there is disagreement.
So also to clarify, Amir, his vision was that, so somebody opens a PR, adds something, we make the comment with all of this quantitative data, and then someone else would come in, see the data, and they would merge it. And that's the way the system would work. So I'm all for a voting system. I think that's a great way of handling it. It's just then it would be a question of how are we going to have a voting system on GitHub.
Right. And by the way, we don't, it seems like we've gotten stuck waiting for the code to be written to implement this.
You're not wrong.
Okay.
I think you can do work around the non-existence of this to start with as well.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? I'm all for tools to make things easier, but if that's our blocker, well, let's back down to either, simpler tools. I'll say no tool, but you can argue that Zoom's a tool. So, having a meeting and going thumbs up, thumbs down isn't a fancy tool. but I don't care.
Okay.
There are
And
better
if
ways
the,
to do it, I think, than that. But you know,
if the ingestion volume is low enough, you could easily spend 5-10 minutes at the start of a meeting going yes, no, and hopefully avoiding a lot of the discussion.
right.
Yeah.
I will say that I think one thing that we could do. This is something I advocated earlier, but people wanted more fancy tools. Let me re-raise it. Basically, using a big honking Google sheet and just have people review. I will observe that, in fact, that's how pretty much the Linux Foundation handles paper reviews, where we score each of the ones that we know something about, and then we use that scoring information to figure out the answers. I don't think Google Sheets have security on per column basis, so you have to trust that people aren't going to edit somebody else's answers. Generally, that's not been a problem. And you can detect when somebody does that. So, you know, I don't think, I think that would be an alternative solution.
Fair.
I-
I'm okay
That's
with
what
that for now.
I one thing missing from Sheets is like very easy change tracking. I know the owner of the doc can see it, but I'm not sure about others. The other thing I had a question about in the process, and this is probably not until the process for ingestion is finished, but also, is there a limit to the size of the list? And also, what is the like exit criteria for things that are on there that probably shouldn't belong there at all anymore? So,
Okay.
like, is it infeasible for this, like feasible for this to grow forever? And yeah.
Let's see here. You know what? I am trying to take notes at the same time, and I think I just, I think I failed on my multitasking. Can you please repeat the question?
Sure, like the process is for ingestion, but what about the other parts, like size, like how big is the set of critical projects? Is there a limit to it?
Yes.
And also, if something, how does something leave the list or the set? Especially if you have a limit to the size, then also you need some way to say, well, this thing shouldn't be in here.
Right.
Yeah. Then you need to stack rank things, and yeah.
Yeah. Now, okay. As far as how big is the set of critical projects, up to this point, there's been a consensus to limit it to about 100. Okay. It doesn't have to be exactly 100. I think the current list is what, 103. Okay. I mean, basically, it doesn't have to be exactly 100, but the rationale for that is that we're not making a list for navel gazing purposes. I mean, you can navel gaze if you wish, but the goal is to focus at funding and security audit efforts on projects that are especially important, and I would add especially important and especially those at risk. That's actually been a topic of, should we only, up to this point, we've only tried to identify just what's critical, whether or not it's at risk or not. But I think the goal here is we want to focus on a small set so that we can apply funding, because if you say, hey, give me the first 100,000, you take whatever dollars you get divided by 100,000, nothing useful happens. So, 100 is a little arbitrary, but I think the theory was that, at least going in, and the decisions can change, the purpose is somebody else taking notes. Oh, bless you. The purpose was to make it so that it was something that was reasonable, that was small enough so that we could reasonably pull a significant subset and do some funded work with them. Okay. Whereas if it's 10,000, 100,000, I mean, Omega actually is looking at the top 10,000. But they're talking about just using tools, and they're actually very much expecting to include in that top 10,000 all of the components identified by this working group in that top 10,000. Under the presumption if it's in this top 100 group, it must be in the top 10,000. So I'm sure, if they look at something and they say, what's wrong with you, they might make an exception, but at least that's the current going in position. But for the alpha part, they can't fund everything. Now, they're not promising to take exactly the list as gospel, and not at all, but this is one of their key inputs, and rightly so.
So David, question. So how would Node qualify? Because Node already gave Alpha Omega, like they already have an engagement, if I'm not mistaken. So
yes. Node, I think Node's actually on the current critical list, if I recall correctly.
Correct. But what the reason I was saying is because then, because they also have an engagement with Rust, and they also have an engagement pretty much with every single language. So
no, not even close.
You get.
I know over 100 programming languages. They're only funding a few.
I get it. You get my point. That they have Rust, they have like all the immediate ones. I think they have Python, don't they? They have
Python, Rust, Node, which is not the same as JavaScript. Okay.
No.
And right.
Or I think it's OpenJS, right? Who gave them one.
Yeah, there's actually a couple things, but that's the set for languages. Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. My apologies.
No. You're fine. You're fine. Well, the reason I say that is because, like, with that in mind, should we, like, for example, when we say projects, are we talking about critical projects to like that infrastructure? Like, for example, TypeScript. I think they would. Because you could consider like Python, for example, as an entire project, or we could consider like Flask in Python as a project. You see what I'm trying to say?
Right. They're not funding Flask. Flask.
I was just from a critical infrastructure standpoint, and I was just throwing out Flask because it was the first Python project.
Okay, sure. Fair enough. And the good news is that many of us aren't going to know what Flask is. So, Flask wouldn't actually be insane, by the way, as something on the list. But
the Django or something.
Yeah, and actually Django is on that list.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think the short answer here is, if you look at the goal was comments, and if you look at the comments and thoughts, this was done in a hurry, and so it's not as well explained why. But if you look on the right-hand side, if you open up the list and look on the rightmost list, it says comments and thoughts, and this was basically why is this here? Okay. And fundamentally, it's and you'll notice that basically widely used or used a lot, it's those kinds of phrases that are very, very widely used for the, in terms of justifications. Okay. And you're absolutely right that the leveling varies. I'm not sure if that's, I'm not even sure that's completely solvable. Okay.
Agreed. I know that when it gets to like Linux desktop, it's very hard.
Well, and to be honest, Linux desktop, I think that's too big a scope.
Right. But we did talk about the kernel, right?
Yes. Now the Linux kernel is on that list, and I think that's totally justifiable. TypeScript, by the way, is on the list as well, on the current list.
Mm-hmm.
And the rationale, I think, for the languages is because obviously, it's obviously not all languages. On the other hand, if the most widely used language implementations are subverted, a very large number of programs get subverted. And in ways that are surprising. One of the interesting ones, for example, that is on the list is Ruby. Ruby's a decently widely used programming language. It's one I happen to use a fair amount myself. But one interesting thing that came up in discussions is not only is it a fairly widely used language, but GitHub and GitLab are implemented in Ruby. So a very serious, malicious, very serious subversion in Ruby can lead to subversion of most of the open source software.
Right.
So, it's those kinds of, wow, if this has a serious vulnerability, the impact would be massive. I think is the underlying argument.
But then you have things like Storybook, and then you have things like String Decoder, which are they work at two completely different levels in JS.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you have like System D, which I'm sure a lot of people, if this was Gen 2, we would have all gotten burned.
Yeah, because Gen 2 doesn't use System D, therefore no one uses System D. Is that your argument?
No, my argument is that without open, oh crap, I forgot what it's called. Without the other one, then there's a bunch of them that wouldn't work, like S6, and there's a lot of init managers that would basically go, that would not work. So,
well, okay, I think I think that basically goes back to the we need to argue not on categories of functionality, but on how critical is this in the sense of how widely used is it? If a vulnerability happened there, how bad would it be? System D, for right or for wrong, is very, very widely used. I think I could argue that most deployed Linux systems today use it. If it's an actual, okay. So it's not really a quality argument. It's more of a how widely used.
I'm with you. I use System D, and I'm not supposed to. And most Gen 2 developers use System D. Believe it or not.
Yeah, but see, I think we should be careful to not view this as this is the list of the best software.
Right.
That is at no point have we claimed that that's this list.
Well, let me just say this, David. It has come up in other phone calls about like the disevenness here, because I think that it's even been mentioned about tracking this differently. So I know that's not really what we're doing, but I know it's come up is all I'm saying.
Sure. So the current list was developed relatively quickly because, fundamentally, and you can blame me, but the Great MFA project desperately needed a list of some kind.
Right.
And so we came up with a list. We know it can be improved. To be honest, I'm actually proud of the list. I'm sure it's imperfect, but we made a decent start. People scream about particular entries, but don't scream about the list as the worst ever.
No, it's not.
So let's work and make it better.
Okay.
And I think that's
so we're in your mind, where would something like poll kit go?
I'm sorry, where would what go? I didn't
Poll
hear
kit, which is basically like,
I didn't hear the word cold kit.
Poll kit, POL kit, poll kit.
Oh, policy kit.
Yeah.
Okay. Frankly, policy kit controls security decisions. Correct. So I think that makes a pretty, but I think poll kit's GNOME specific, isn't it?
No, they both use them. KDE. And by the way, they're both of them are noticeably missing from this list. KDE.
Well,
no,
that was actually a straight up decision. The decision was early on, we're not going to try to list GNOME or KDE as a whole because it's just too big. In the same way we don't list Fedora or Debian, again, too big. So we were trying to drill it down a little further. You can argue we didn't drill it down too far, another was too far.
But this is where the deceivedness comes in, because you do have Homebrew that uses Gen 2 as upstream, because I know that because I'm the person that does that. And and you have also Nix in here, which, so I would say that you would need all of the packaging, all the 9 parent packaging teams, if you're going to go that route, because Nix is not even a parent packaging team.
I think the argument there is, oops, and I see Caleb. Let me not be the only person talking.
No worries, no worries.
My hand is up more to kind of, I mean, it's interesting to discuss why things are in there or not in there. But I guess my question is going back to something you mentioned at this earlier, David, which was a lot of the list is reflective of what is important, and I think that makes sense when you're only looking at this from at the start. But since if a project's been invested in, its security posture is improved, at what point does that actually get taken off the list because we're comfortable this is this project's getting the attention it deserves, or has had the attention it deserves, and isn't a big security risk anymore?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that raises. Wait a minute. That actually raises a really important question, and it's one that we really didn't adjust so well. Do you take something off the list because is this a list of simply what's important, or is this a list of critical open source software that has higher than expected risks due to problems of some kind? Because in my mind, if it's just critical, the answer to how you get rid of it is because people aren't using it as much anymore. And that's how it goes off.
From my understanding,
go ahead.
From Amir's point of view, we are not taking security into account here. I kind of asked. That's what
we're taking security, but not the how bad off they are.
Correct.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. So my understanding is that if suddenly tomorrow everybody stopped using PyTorch or or CPython, then it would go off this list.
Another thing that we discussed in a previous call was something of like a retirement, so that we have a separate list where we retired packages from the list.
I think that the simple solution is you re-go through the process and things retire as a matter of course.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my suggestion. But I do agree it needs to.
And specifically that came up with X because how X is very poorly maintained. Because one of the suggestions we had was we could use the last commit that was made, but we found out that that's not entirely accurate.
This means that something could technically leave the list if they're a key dependency for a large project, and then
that's correct.
That key dependent then removes that as a dependency, and then now it's lost all its usage. So that's one way you could prune the list as well. But a lot of the projects that are on that list currently are definitely critical in the sense that they are kind of an end thing or a framework itself or a language implementation or something like that.
Okay, yeah, I'm actually adding that to the little note here. So basically, do people agree that as long as we keep updating the list, that's a reasonable way to removing them?
Yep.
I think that's a reasonable idea. Although we don't have quorum, and this probably should be brought up at the next working group as well.
Agreed.
All right. Okay, yeah, we're basically we're 2 minutes to time anyway. So I think so. I don't who is actually building the tool to capture all this stuff. Who is that?
I am. Me and Caleb, I guess.
Okay, Randall.
I think Randall was kind of doing most of the is at the focus point of it, and I would argue you're leading it, Randall, and I'm contributing by building support in the criticality.
Basically, what happened, Krob, is that I made a comment like a meeting ago to Amir about how did criticality tool fit into everything that we're doing, and then me and Caleb got in touch to basically figure that out, because apparently the initial idea was for it to go together, and then it was like, oh yeah, we have that. We should probably talk to Caleb. So yeah.
All right. So here's the problem. However, this is starting to block the whole process. So I guess it's rather unfair, and we're wrapping up the meeting when I probably shouldn't dump this on you, but maybe we just at least stick in the ear. At what point do we say building tools is awesome, but maybe we shouldn't block this round and push that off to future rounds? And Randall, maybe this is at least, you don't need to answer it now, but if you have an answer, great. But I am totally sympathetic to the, hey, I've got some ideas, but I'm out of time. I am there all the time myself. So if you've got some cool ideas for tools, but you're not able to wrap that up soon, maybe we ought to say, hey, good idea. We're not abandoning it, but let's try something else that doesn't require us to build anything.
I think what kind of got us was that I built kind of a framework where you could load scripts like for different like packaging systems, specifically with NPM. We just started with NPM. And then it became a thing. If criticality score already has these functionalities, let's not build something that later on is going to be like parallel to something we already have. I think that was the ideology there, because the NPM version is somewhat already built. It's just that then it was a matter of, we have the criticality score and do we want to use that? And yeah.
Yeah. So why not use criticality score for the data anyway?
Yeah, so that's kind of what we decided, is that to use your criticality score.
Okay. Well, but criticality score doesn't tell us which ones, that's not the list of 100. That's just simply an input to the decision. Because if you look at it, it's basically somebody proposes it, we use data to make a determination.
I think next time.
Whoops, sorry.
I think that next time when Amir is here, we should have a discussion of how we're going to define about checking in projects, because I know Amir wants it to be very lax, where like, yeah. And
well, he wants the proposal process to be very lax, but yes, we can't have a list of 100 no Correct. More without.
That's my concern.
Yeah, no, I of course, Amir's not here, so I don't think he meant, though, that anybody, whatever they propose, automatically gets in. I think his idea was when there's general consensus, go ahead and let it in because there's general consensus, and then argue about the rest. But I'm looking at the actual text written in; it could be interpreted both ways. So I think this is a text unclear problem.
Yes.
All right. Yes. I think that we are at time. Thank you everybody for your participation. I realize this is going to be challenging, but I think we basically, Randall, I do, and Caleb, I very much do appreciate your proposal. And we are definitely going to try to get as much work out of you as you'll let us get out of you. But on the other hand, I don't want us to be stuck forever waiting for more tools to be built. I think I would much rather take things using simple tools we have at hand and get things done.
Agreed.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. I think we're done. Are we done?
Yes. Thank you, David.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
All right. Talk soon. Bye-bye.